at the very end, without ever warning us at all, that this thrownness which has been around is now comes out to be birth, and lo and behold, it's the other end of the hole. It looked like we only plugged up one end of the hole. Why bother to plug up one end of the hole if you can't plug it all up? And so I want to say he should have done the death thrownness plugging up of the hole as well as the death part, or not at all. I mean, I'm never sure. I don't understand, and we had a long discussion in my office just what this hole is and why it's important and what gives it to us anyway. If anybody knows, please come and tell me in office hours next Wednesday. I certainly don't. But let's read the rest of this at the top of 425. The other end, however, but death is only the end of Dasein. It's just one of the ends. The other end, however, is the beginning, the birth. Only that entity which is between birth and death presents the whole, which we have been seeking. Well, so we just didn't get the whole. And not only didn't we get it, but we didn't get it through all of Division 2, and it didn't seem to make any difference. We did all the hermeneutical, phenomenological work without it, and now tacked on at the end, we're going to get it. That is just crazy. Tyler, can you help?
He tells us to know the whole because we want the beginning. No, the beginning. So.
That's right. He doesn't do the beginning. No, and he does. That's right. And there's no reason why you should have the two ends plugged, nailed down into a hole just to do the stretch part. It's stretchy. It stretches all along like elastic. So I don't know what he's doing. And there's something you said made me think, oh yeah, and thrownness doesn't play much of a role in this chapter. It's mostly about anticipation and choosing possibilities and projecting. And then all of a sudden at the end, I was going to save this remark till the end, but it is so strange that I'll read it right now. On 438, I mean, we have to go, to get the full shock, you have to go through all the talk of projecting on possibilities that the chapter is mostly about, until you all of a sudden come to the bottom of 438, which says, from the phenomena handed down and repeating, which are rooted in the future, it has become plain why the historicizing of on authentic history lies predominantly in having been. So suddenly, the historicizing of authentic history, which has all been future-oriented, over and over he said that in the chapter, turns out now to give us seemingly the priority of having been. I'll just read more, but it remains all the more enigmatic in what way this historicizing as fate is to constitute the whole interconnected of Dasein from birth to death. How can recourse to resoluteness? You see, now we're back in guilt and resoluteness. Bring us any enlightenment. Is not each resolution just one more single experience, and so forth? Is the connectedness of authentic historicizing to consist, let us say, in an uninterrupted sequence of resolutions? The answer is of course not. But how come all of a sudden it turns out having been is prior in some interesting sense? Now, what I will try to convince you of, if I can keep track of all this, is that indeed the past is prior, and in a certain way more important than the future. And it's just odd that 99% of the time he prioritizes the future for reasons I've never fully understood. And it looks like there he prioritizes the thrownness. And the truth is they're totally correlative and what's his word always, equiprimordial and so forth. I mean, you can't make any sense out of the thrownness except to take them up as possibilities. That's what he keeps saying. But you ought to equally well say, again, this is trying to give you the background of what I'm going to talk about all today, you ought to equally well say there's something about the thrownness that determines what possibilities you're going to take up. That is, what wasn't clear, and what I want to try to talk about right now is I'm just seeing if I missed something. No, okay, so what I want to take up is the sense in which there is something positive about the thrownness and the guilt. Put it this way. I've been talking and saying we can't get behind our thrownness. That's true. We're finite. We never can understand fully what our our view on the world. It's too pervasive, and it's always already there, and so forth. But I couldn't give any sense to, well, what's the positive value of this sort of inchoate, heavy thrownness, which is on the basis of which we act. What is it? Well, I think, though he never says it, he ought to say that it's the mattering. That mattering determines which possibilities we're going to project on. So you've got to have equally possibilities, and mood or mattering, something that makes the possibilities matter so that we project on them. And he never spells it out, but I'm ready to spell it out. There has to be this kind of limit on how guilt reveals something positive, I want to say. It accounts for the steadiness and the constancy of authentic existence by setting up something like what matters to that Dasein. And the Dasein, of course, can't get behind its moods and its sense of what's important. And yet, it has to, it can't get behind them in the sense, one, that it can't spell them out, two, it can't get control of them, and, but they're equally important, I think. Now, I'm just going to go through the chapter having said that, but that's what's on my mind, and if anybody has more to say about it, let me know. But it doesn't make me happy to convince you that this chapter is hopelessly confused, and it's the last chapter of a book which, in retrospect, looks more confused. So I'm going to just put this chapter where I think it belongs, and what I think it's doing, in the hopes that that we can make a coherent, orderly book out of it. So let's start back on 428. He drops sort of the bombshell about birth right at the beginning, but the real issue what he starts doing is formal indication, as usual. That is, he's now going to talk about the way Dasein is spread out in time, and he's going to do it by telling you, starting with the way we normally understand it, both in our everyday understanding and in our traditional philosophical understanding. Understand it meaning the way we're related to the series to time. And he's going to tell us that that's, of course, 180 degrees wrong. So life seems to be a series of momentary experiences. And first, that's the Cartesian Husserlian tradition. I just as I say it seems to me it's not a tradition you can blame on the Greeks already. I wish we had Adam here to know whether Heidegger in some lecture tries to blame it on the Greeks. It seems it's a Cartesian something or other. But in any case, it certainly dominates all of philosophy after Descartes. And the question comes up in Hume and in Kant, everywhere. What unifies this series of nows, of what Husserl called the living, streaming present? Then you have this problem of all these present moments, each one of them fully present, and how does it connect up with all the other moments that are fully present? Heidegger's going to say that's all wrong. Our experience, and we all believe it too in our everyday understanding, we think of ourselves as living moment by moment when we reflect on what we're doing. I think Heidegger thinks, though I didn't find any place where he said it right out, that if you reflect on what you're doing, that's how you're bound to that's what you're bound to think, that you're having a stream of inner experiences, one right after another, and that's exactly what happened when Husserl reflected on what he called inner time consciousness. But even, you can get anybody to think that what could they be having an experience of but the present, and then another experience of the present, and so forth. And so those would be a series of momentary experiences, and that's what he's talking about on 425 already. So let's go back there. I think this has got Husserl in mind, the bottom paragraph. What seems simpler than to characterize the connectedness of life between birth and death? It consists of a sequence of experiences, Erlebnisse would be the technical Husserl term, in time. But if one makes a more penetrating study of this way of characterizing the connectedness in question, and especially of the ontological assumptions behind it, the remarkable upshot is that in this sequence of experiences, what is really actual is in each case just that experience which is present at hand in the current now. That's exactly what Husserl discovered in its internal time consciousness. And Heidegger thinks that's wrong. So look on 429. That's about 15 lines down. I'm still doing formal indication. That takes our historical temporal nature and characterizes it with the help of with time in timeness, as he puts it. And then it turns out that what? I just want to read something here. But if this, you go on reading, but if this ordinary characterization is to be stripped of its seeming self-evident and exclusiveness, historicality must first be deduced purely in terms of Dasein's primordial temporality. That's what he's going to try to do later. I mean, he's already done it the way the book is organized, which is so it's funny to propose to do it now. But we will get back in the reading. I don't remember whether it's next time. I think it is next time. But someplace where he is going to do the job, he thinks or claims, of deducing the theories of nows. Well, it takes a lot of chapters earlier on to get the series of nows from primordial temporality. This is demanded even by way of these objective, but demanded even by the way these are objectively connected. That, by the way, is some peculiar claim. It's the kind of claim that says, well, you can get real guilt of debts to society and owing money out of primordial guilt, though he doesn't say how. And now he's saying, well, you can really get succession out of primordial temporality, but he doesn't say how. I think he doesn't do it. And how many of you read Blattner's Temporality book? Remember, that's the big deal in Blattner's book, that Heidegger fails to deliver an account of how the primordial temporality underwrites and under certain conditions turns into a series of nows. I'm not sure that Heidegger thinks he can do it or should be doing it, but right now he seems to think he should be doing it. This is demanded that even the objective temporal moments have to be derived from primordial temporality. Keep that in mind. That's a huge issue in that little sentence. I mean, Bill Blattner claims that Heidegger fails to do what he promises to do here. I don't remember whether Bill quotes that sentence, to derive succession, which is what this is about. This temporality has all sorts of characteristics. Heidegger, I think, has 6. And one of them is succession, which is what we're talking about here. And Heidegger fails to get it. I mean, Bill is right. Bill is very smart. And the Heidegger does not succeed in deriving succession. But when we get there, I want to claim Heidegger was never trying to derive succession. But this sentence is a troublesome one for me, because but I don't think he even claims to try to do it. I don't know why he puts it in here, except it's as if formal indication requires you to claim that the misleading thing you started with is, after all, made possible by, and somehow you're led to the wrong one. That's part of what he thinks he owes, even if he doesn't pay it. So let's see. Time, as with timeness, stems from the temporality of Dasein. Historicality and with timeness turns out to be... Wait, what is this? Since, however, time as with timeness also stems from the temporality of Dasein, historicality and with timeness turn out to be equiprimordial. I can't imagine why he thinks that. But I would have thought historicality, stretching along, was precisely more basic than within timeness. And that's what he's complaining about. Well, he's complaining, I see. He could be complaining that Husserl and Descartes have made within timeness, namely succession of moments of time, basic. And it's not as if he's claiming the opposite, although I think maybe he is. He's claiming right here that you can't try to start with within timeness, that at least equiprimordially we're stretched along in a way that is not a series of moments. everybody's looking worried. I thought I was being relatively clear how murky this is and what I'm going to say gets next. Does anybody have any problems that they can articulate? Okay, I think I've done, let's see, formal indication. Let me just see. So it's not a series of moments. On 425, I just read it. 429, I read what I wanted to read. 441, he keeps saying it, but somehow I was just trying to convince myself that this is what he wanted to say. So, and now I haven't showed you that everyday Dasein has the experience of series of moments. I've only said philosophers think that. But on 441 at the bottom, everyday Dasein has been dispersed into the many kinds of things which daily come to pass. Its opportunities and circumstances which concern, keep tacitly awaiting in advance, have faded, have fate as their outcome, in terms of that with which inauthenticity existing Dasein concerns itself, it completes its history. It's all dispersed. I'm just skipping down. It must first pull itself together from the dispersion and disconnectedness of the things that come to pass. So everyday inauthentic experience is just a sequence of disconnected events. So no wonder we think of ourselves as being that. Okay. So now the question is, well, that's all wrong. That's a quick bit of formal indication, but you're supposed to now believe that that view is wrong, and we have to find out how we are stretched along. Since we're not, somehow can be anyway, we are normally dispersed into a bunch of events, series of events or moments, but we can pull this together. And when we pull it together, we've got something he calls historicality. And now the question is to tell us what really is our way of being stretched along. So how are we really stretched along? Well, whatever it is, it's got something to do with the difference between reflection, which gives people like Husserl the notion that we are all a stream of inner experiences of nows. And how would we get out of that? Well, I think one basic thing is Heidegger wants to talk about the temporality of our involvement. The temporality of using equipment is much less dispersed and much more whole and organized and stretched along the reflection on our stream of inner sort of Joycean stream of consciousness. And now he's going to take up the way Dasein is temporal when it's involved. And that's historic. It's going to call that way historicizing. So that's when historicizing comes in italics. So let's read it. Here he's going to define the terms right after where he's talking about, so he's going to clarify the connectedness of life, where that is the stretching along, the movement of existence is not, interestingly enough, he says there that he's got two kind of words for movement, just you've got to be careful of this. The movement of existence, that's the one he wants to talk about, Bewegtheit, is not the motion of something present at hand. So the movement of existence is this involved activity. Now, just a sort of sub-point that I wasn't even going to mention, but I can't resist. It's how to tell you how half-baked the book is. After going to the trouble to distinguish Bewegtheit from Bewegung, on 444 he's got Bewegung where he should have said Bewegtheit. Look at the first paragraph at the top of the first full paragraph. The existential interpretation of Dasein's historicality is constantly getting eclipsed. The obscurities are all the harder to dispel, and so forth and so forth. And everything is haunted by the enigma of being. I don't know what that means. And as now has been made plain, by that of motion. But the enigma of motion isn't physical motion. What he's been talking about is Bewegtheit for 10 pages. And I really don't know why. Why does he introduce the subject as the question about how to understand movement in this involved Dasein sense, and then say the question is motion, which he's back here, defined as the present at hand. What in the world is the enigma of the present at hand doing in this story? I mean, like, he needs an editor. So let's see now. And then now we've gotten to the constitution of historicality. That's the subject that this chapter is supposed to deal with. And it turns out, again, I can't help keep coming back to evidence for my view that this is the wrong place for this chapter. As soon as you start to talk about historicality, you end up starting, so to speak, where you left off with anticipatory resoluteness, 434. And you see that happening. He's reviewing what's happened, and at the end of the top paragraph, he's saying, thus the interpretation of Dasein's historicality will prove to be at bottom more concrete working out of temporality. We first reveal temporality with regard to the way existing authentically, which we characterize as anticipatory resoluteness. How far does this imply authentic historicizing? Well, that's the right question. He's now going to take up that's why I wanted to put this right. I would put this right after anticipatory resoluteness. He's now going to take up anticipatory resoluteness and see what more you have to add to understand historicizing. And so he says, we have defined resoluteness as projecting upon one's own most being guilty, a projecting which is reticent and ready for anxiety. Resoluteness gains its authenticity as anticipatory resoluteness. See, he's just reviewing what I would say were the two chapters prior to this one. In this, Dasein understands itself with regard to its potentiality for being, and it does so in a manner that... Now here's something interesting, that will go right under the eyes of death in order thus to take over its thrownness, and so forth. That's a new way of describing anticipatory resoluteness. And then comes this puzzling thing. It takes over its thrownness, and to take it over wholly. So we're back to the as if wholly has already been done, because this is what we've done already. In the resolute taking over one's facultative there signifies at the same time that the situation is one which has been resolved upon. You recognize all that is straight talk from the death chapter, and well, from the guilt and death, from the resoluteness, followed by, I think, the anticipation chapter. Now, another thing we could talk about for a minute, which I think is an interesting open question that I ended up talking a long time in my office about. Granted that some kind of holy something, that the wholeness was supposedly provided by the death chapter. Now, it looks like they didn't quite manage to do that, because wholeness is still on the table. But how are we supposed to think of being toward death, which is a way of life that constantly takes account of our vulnerability? How are we supposed to think of that as providing an understanding of wholeness? Heidegger, as far as I know, never tells us, and nobody in the discussion in my office had any passage to tell us. I have a proposal, but and maybe somebody will find some passage somewhere that helps. I think if it's really true that death is the way of life that manifests an understanding in its activity of the vulnerability of Dasein to the impossibility of any more possibilities, which is the absolute impossibility of possibilities, he also says, which is, I take it, a description of what happens when your world collapses. It could happen to you on your deathbed, but it can happen to you when the person you care most about leaves you, or the job that you've been trained for all your life, suddenly you can't do it anymore or something. When all your possibilities collapse, then you've got more than just... I'm trying to see now, where's the wholeness come in? Well, I think the wholeness comes in is that it's not that the total collapse of all your possibilities doesn't mean just all of the finite possibilities you've got, but all the possibilities you could ever have. I mean, it's got a totalizing character. If you're going to live in terms of the total collapse of your way of life, then you've got a sense in that way of living of totality that you don't have unless you do live that way. And so he has a right to bring in his understanding of death, once you formally indicate it, as the ground of a certain feature of this wholeness. It isn't a kind of wholeness which is sort of nailed down at both ends and doesn't come unzipped, the kind that it looks like birth just unzipped it and after he had it nailed down with death. It's a different kind of wholeness. It's a kind of wholeness which is expressed every moment that Dasein is acting. Dasein is going about its life. If it does it authentically, its whole life is, so to speak, at stake in this abstract sort of way, that whole life is vulnerable in this to total collapse. And therefore there's this sort of dimension. I mean, if it helps, how many have had Kierkegaard? I forget. Not very many. I mean, Kierkegaard would call this eternity in time. That is, that there's a feature of your life which is, you know already whenever you got it, that it applies not only now, but from the beginning to the end. And I'm saying in this world collapse, you know that if you got it now, then it applies to your life totally, in the sense that every detail that makes any difference anyway. There was something more I wanted to say about that, because it's something about oh, yeah, I'm glad I got it back, because it's so tangential that I would have lost it and felt bad about it. I may have mentioned it before. We're very close again to the book of Jonathan Lear, Radical Hope. I did mention it, didn't I? I mean, there's a really existing description of world collapse. The world of the Crow Indians collapsed. Everything that made their life meaningful gave it continuity. It was in the minds of the women who were cooking the dinner that the warriors were going to go out. It was in the minds of the warriors. Everything they were doing was formulated in a certain way, and it collapsed. And it collapsed in a way that has a kind of totality about it. Okay, back to where we were. So death adds the holy. Where am I? With a WH. Let me see that. So back to the concrete situation. But now it's a way of being. So when you hold on to anticipatory resoluteness now in the way he's talking about it, you see that it makes you an individual. It brings you into the situation. That's where I am now. Where's that? Oh, yeah, here we are on 434. That's where that was just a little speech on the word holy, right where it appears above 383 in the margin. The resolute taking over of one's factical there signifies at the same time that the situation, one which has been resolved, signifies at the same time that the situation is one that has been resolved upon. Now, I think the situation that gets resolved upon is now bigger than the Aristotelian Phronimous kind of situation. I think the situation that gets resolved upon is your whole life as a situation. And I think that he thinks that the Phronimous, I mean, he never says that the Phronimous does that. The Phronimous just does the kairos thing, seizes the moment for this situation, and does this thing. But there is another way of holding on to your life, which gives it a certain structure from beginning to end, and that whole structure's, I think, the situation. Let's see if I can give you any reason why I think that. No, not right now. But and maybe there isn't any, but I think there must be. So that you do the situation of your life, and you find the issue for your generation, for your time. These are the sense in which this historicizing is a bigger whole and a different kind of whole than the birth and death at the ends of your life. So when you act anticipatorily, resolutely in a way that's called historicizing, then you, I think, experience your whole life as a unified situation, experience the issue for your time, and later Heidegger's going to say, respond to your whole culture in a way that could change the whole cultural world. And that's sort of hinted at. I mean, that's later Heidegger maybe being hinted at. He says, maybe it's not, maybe it's something else, but he does say on 446, and maybe, I'm not sure what this is, but he says that authenticity has to do with fate, destiny, and world history. And so there's some story later in the chapter about whole worlds being able to die, so that equipment which once had a meaning doesn't have any meaning, and why not? Because the world in which that equipment made sense is dead. He sort of knows about that in the background, but he doesn't talk about cultural world collapse, like the way the medieval gave way to the modern, but he will later. So now, death adds the holy, I say. Haven't I said that already? I have. So have I read it already? Let me see. Well, now we're on to a new thing, and that is, and this is an interesting one, from whence, we must ask, whence in general Dasein can draw the possibilities upon which it factically projects itself. And that's going to be, again, I'm going to tell you what I think it says. I think Heidegger makes a distinction, I know Heidegger makes a distinction, which I missed for years, between the tradition and the heritage. If you haven't noticed that, you should note that you should notice that. Because the tradition is bad, and you aren't used to the tradition being bad, and the heritage is good. The tradition is whatever it is that Das Mann thinks, usually fancy people of the higher culture of Das Mann. But still, Das Mann, the tradition is what they agree on and find a kind of shared intelligibility in. The heritage is the interesting thing. And what is this heritage? Well, it's, I think, the kind of, again, inchoate, non-expressible reservoir, which, if you get in the right relation to it, will give you new possibilities for acting on and looking at the world. But they're not possibilities already there, the way the tradition has a whole lot to say about what it's got to do. He has an interesting distinction in the Age of the World picture, which is always on my mind. In The Origin of the Work of Art, which is always in my mind when I'm thinking about this. The difference between schaffen and schöpfen in German. Schaffen is something you do and make. In particular, he's talking about people who make works of art. Schöpfen means to fish up something from a well, I gather, from a reservoir. And you've got to have this, and that's later going to be called the earth. But you've got, in The Origin of the Work of Art, you've got to have these inchoate possibilities, which you can, by acting on them and projecting them, make them determinate. But to begin with, they're not a kind of repository of a list of explicit ways to act. But they are something, and that's got to do with the mattering too, something which can draw you to act in a certain way, even though you can't understand what you're doing as having a goal and choosing it until you've already acted that way. And that's the sense in which it's something you can't make, schaffen. You can't just do it. Well, schaffen means what? Make, I guess. I want a better word. It's not something you can just make. It's something that you have to be open and receptive to, which can call you to act in such a way that you will, so to speak, you will later understand the meaning of what you did. That you will later understand that was the issue for your generation or your time. But it isn't just given so that everybody can see that that's it, or it isn't even given so that everybody sort of knows it, but not everybody sees it. It's not given at all until you act on it, because it doesn't really become the issue of your time unless you're like John Muir and act on the dangers to the environment, at which point it begins to be an issue and maybe the issue. But it would be too easy if it was already sort of written. There are all sorts of issues all the time, potential issues, or even that's too determinate. There's all sorts of attractions and solicitations that could become issues, but by acting on one or another of them, you make them an issue. That's what acting authentically to take up the heritage is, I think. Does that? I mean, I'm puzzled by the last time everybody had an opinion about everything, and I was lost. Maybe this shows that I'm not lost, that everybody is quiet because they're listening to me, and okay, well, I'll just go on as if I knew what I was talking about, but I warn you, I don't. For instance, what I just said is straight out contradicted by Heidegger at a certain point, which made me almost want to throw away the book and give up, because I had just made up this whole story about how you can't choose among the possibilities that make up your thrownness and just project on one of them, that it's got this very important characteristic of having to be made determinate by your acting on it. That's why that's what's thrown about it. That's what it means to say you can't get behind your thrownness, the positive side of it. But look at this. On 384, I'd love to find the German is wrong, but I suspect must have looked it up once because I was so unhappy about it. So let me just start reading, and you notice where I would become unhappy. Starting where it says 384 in the margin of 435. The more authentically Dasein resolves, and this means that in anticipating death it understands itself unambiguously in terms of its own most distinctive possibility, the more unequivocally does it choose and find the possibility of its existence, and the less has it done so by accident. I mean, after the story I told you, which I hope was convincing, it seems to me phenomenologically obviously right. I don't understand how you can have your own possibility already there and then go ahead and choose it. And if that wasn't enough, I mean, I'll give him one slip, but it goes right on like that. Only by the anticipation of death is every accidentality and provisional possibility driven out. Oh, already crazy, but still. Only being free for death gives Dasein its goal outright and pushes existence into its finitude. Its goal. But I just wanted to say that it doesn't have a goal. It only finds out what it was trying to do after it did it. Eugene is finally either upset enough or something to tell me about it. Go ahead.
One thing about this is that this makes really clear that guilt doesn't.
It doesn't give you consent.
You still are.
Well, I see. That's funny. Was going to say just the opposite. Maybe it's even in my notes. I think guilt gives you constancy in the sense that there is this sort of inchoate mattering which is drawing you on your calling, so to speak, whether personal or cultural. And because there's a calling, it gives you, and your job is to work it out. And as you say, you could work it out in lots of different ways. But the issue that you have to work out, sort of your calling, that I think stays constant. So I would have thought that guilt gives you a certain kind of constancy, but it leaves you open to another kind of inconstancy. But if you're just sort of responding at random to situations like Aphronimus, that wouldn't. Maybe that's what you're saying. The guilt that was early on, the Aphronimus guilt, is not the kind of guilt that has the right positive features. Absolutely. And he never tells us very much about the positive features. He doesn't seem to really understand them until later, when he does this Schöpf and Earth story in Origin, which is already 8 years later. But because it's true, the Aphronimus could be just responding to this situation by giving the appropriate gift, and the next day or an hour later he can respond to that situation by insulting somebody who needs to be insulted, and so forth. And that's certainly a series of non-steady, what was your word, steady? In his word, you used a different word though. Steady or not a continuous kind of life. But if you think that thrownness and guilt reveal this other something or other that is the weight of which and is out of which, on the basis of which you haven't got as an object or a goal, but underlies there is any goal mattering and attracting you, then maybe that does give continuity. It's so confusing because he's got it so little worked out what thrownness is and what guilt is and what the features of what the advantage or disadvantage, or well, that's the wrong way to put it, what the phenomenology of not getting behind your thrownness is and what the positive value of that is. I'm doing this, not him, but I'm sure I'm in tune with him. Tyler, you look like you want to say something helpful. Talk real loud. I have trouble hearing you. Neither of what we said. Oh, well, that's exciting. Anticipation.
It's always told you out of the one, and there's a whole bunch of which he calls the quote. So you're called out of the one you know you're supposed to.
Can I just change it a little? It sounds too choice, like you're supposed to do it, you ought to do it. It's what if you're called to do it.
Which is the fit in relation to where one was. And then you're sort of left in this vacuous, okay, now I'm called my own most, and now I'm called to assume my guilt constantly. But on what basis, or within what horizon? And it's only by adding that you can fill up the content.
I would have thought that was just another formal empty one, or even more formal and empty than all the previous list. Oh, there you go again. It sounds so too much an ought. But anyway, can't we just keep saying that you're being called to do? Conscience calls with no, without silently, but it doesn't say you ought to be doing it. That's exactly what it doesn't say.
Even for depth, to understand what it would be, to assume one's guilt constantly. Only by understanding death is one's almost possibility would you understand how conscience calls to your own.
Well, we're back in so many issues about death. I don't know if they're important here, but there are two ways that it could be, just to get this clear, give you kind of wholeness. It could be that final event in your life, which I'm afraid you're talking like that. I mean, otherwise it's the form of your current activity, which is, I take steady and flexible in the face of possible world collapse. Is there some third thing you're I know, that's why I have trouble understanding you, but go ahead. Okay.
Anticipation is never, I think it's somewhere in between. It orientates you, it calls you to something, which is then filled out by anticipation. So constancy, it calls to constantly sin guilt, which means the sin guilt until the end, and one can only understand the end once one grasps death in anticipation. You're called to your own mode, you only understand what that call is. Once one grasps death is one's own mode. You're called to.
And they all come from grasping death as your own most, as your own most non-relatable sort of.
Anticipation allows us to assume the positive concept.
I'm assimilating this. Okay, so let's try to put it so that it's between now. I'll put the two, and then you tell me the between. So Eugene was saying, if you just are resolute like the Phronimus in the guilt chapter, you've got no constancy, because you just respond to one unique situation after another, right? I think that's what you said. And I said, yeah, but there's going to be a kind of constancy, namely that there's some, which Aristotle couldn't understand, but which Christians can understand. There's going to be a kind of call for how you should live your whole life, to put it very, crudely. But anyway, and that's what gives you constancy, though you'll be doing it in lots of different ways. You've got some style, some mission, I don't know how to put it, some sense of your identity, which is just the commonality, the constancy of what you're up to. Now, you want a third thing.
We call constancy. Understand constancy, you have to understand being toward the end, right? When it's constant, someone goes through the end, you of course think through what the end is pertaining to God. At the end of pertaining to God will be set. So to grasp constancy, you have to understand God.
We have to understand what? Not as culture class, but not as at the end of your life either.
Possibility is pertaining to a particular God, which if you grasp it, it allows you to grasp the concept.
I don't know what it is then. I mean, without the phenomena, I don't doubt it, but I don't know what it is.
Here's a call conscience to do it. I could do something equal. It's sort of look around at all the possible possibilities and try and do my own most. Focus it. I have to, what is my own most as opposed to just the only way I can grasp what could be my own most is to see that what is my own well-being, single particular. I have to somehow press into a set of possibilities in light of my own most single life.
Okay, well that feels, I mean, I'll take that over as closer to me. I mean, although Eugene's right about resoluteness, and you're not disagreeing, but you add anticipation. Maybe that's how to reconcile us. Resoluteness alone would give you a series of responses to unique situations. You add anticipation, we're still agreeing, and anticipation gives you something, which I'm calling, you're inchoate calling that you won't find out what it is until you've begun to do it, done it. And that's not so far from your saying you're called to do what you uniquely have to do, and you have to find out how to do it, given the possibilities available to you. Is that okay? Isn't it what? You know, you don't find something. You make something in a way. You make your life. I mean, that's what I think you were saying. You're called to do whatever it takes for whatever you're called to do, and then the emphasis is on you have to find that out and do it.
In that call, and you're going to do your own most, I'm saying you have to do it
A very particular way?
but in the sense of culture persists, general responsibility persists, my particular dogma is it doesn't.
I think your calling is radically individual, so I think that's okay. Let's try this as a test, because this is just another empty term as far as I'm concerned. Even your calling is an empty term. I'm trying to find the phenomena. Well, what would it look like to be called in a way that doesn't, because I'm not going to try to save Heidegger here, have to do with choosing a goal. In fact, it would be just that would be just exactly the wrong way to think about it. It would be like having a sense where as you do what you do, that you're doing well, and that things are going well, and you're sort of living up to what's best for you, and every once in a while having a sense that you're, so to speak, off the beam, that you're doing something now, working for this organization, or getting involved with this person, or teaching in this subject, and it isn't feeling right. You're not being true to what you can't describe it. I once said it in a paper about Merleau-Ponty in a different situation, but never mind. It's like being on a radio beacon at calling. You don't have to hear the beacon all the time. All you have to do is be able to hear when you're off the beam, and then if you just constantly respond and if you've got somehow a sense of how far off the beam and in what direction, you just have to be constantly pulling yourself back on your beam. That's your calling. And maybe you're nodding. Maybe that's got something like it, because I just don't want to say what your beam is, but I want to say you got one.
It's not knowledge that doesn't be it. Yet there is a very particular framework to say, is their own mode. That framework has to be understood as individualized depth. So as someone's pressing into possibilities about a goal, say it's their own mode. Relative to their particular, this is arising opinion.
Okay, well, I'm beginning to. I don't feel too unhappy. I mean, it doesn't seem strange to me. It seems to me that's another legitimate way of understanding it. The list of things that describe ontological death are such a peculiar and heterogeneous bunch. I mean, there is just the possibility of having no more possibilities, which is very formal and very ontological, and it looks like, the formal indication has gone too far from your point of view. And then there's this non-get-overable, utterly unique. What's the jargon for it? I can't. Unrelatable, I suppose. Is that it, or which one? Ownmost, that's what I'm looking for. So then there's this ownmost thing, and that looks like something more than the possibility of having no more possibilities. It looks like your ownmost possibility of you not having any more possibilities, and you want to keep that in, and I want to formalize it out. And I don't know, and I think we're both right. I mean, myself, I think Heidegger's got undigested, heterogeneous bunch of sort of descriptions of death, and you, the reader, pick the ones that you think are the essential ones. I don't think you have, nor do I have, the unget-aroundableness. You could be immortal, in fact, and still have this characteristic of because you don't want it to be on your deathbed that this related to death thing is, so maybe you'll never come to an end in that sense. Okay, well, that's good though. I was feeling bad that we weren't having any discussion. Yeah, yeah.
Why does he go straight to authentic historizing? And you do historicality in general?
Yes, and instead of authentic, I see, isn't it that I never thought of that. I see what you're doing now. Yeah, let me think about it. There's the way he's defined the terms. He's made historicality authentic. That's the way Dasein really is, and that's how it really manifests itself when it's authentic. That's fine, but then you have to. And then if you're asking the question, what gives unity to a life that isn't authentic? Why doesn't historicality have to cover the fact that even inauthentic people's lives are not falling apart into moments? Or is the move to say, well, inauthentic people's lives are falling apart moment by moment, and that's why historicality has to be talked about only in terms of authenticity? That's what I expect. So the whole chapter is about historicality, which is the way that Dasein is held together. Let's look on 427 when he introduces historicizing, see if that helps. The specific movement in which Dasein is stretched along with historicizing. The bare structure of historicizing. He immediately goes to the constancy of the self, and it's a specific temporalizing of temporality, self-constancy. Is historicizing a specific temporalization of temporality? I don't know. Let's read this. Everybody read for themselves, starting on 375 in the margin of page 427. And let me tell you what you're asking yourself. Why is Heidegger talking about historicality? Is he talking historicizing? Is that something that only authentic Dasein does, or is that something that all Dasein? I can't tell. I think talking about a specific temporalizing of temporality is a clue that it's about authenticity. Because later he's going to say, or earlier, the way the book is laid out, temporality temporalizes itself in two ways. And if this is a specific temporalizing of temporality, and you'd think with self-constancy too, that must mean the same as steadiness. So historicizing turns out to be authentically stretching yourself along. And your question is still there. What about Dasein when it's not authentically stretching itself along? Surely it doesn't fall apart into a Cartesian series of moments. At the limit, maybe when it gets its life sufficiently diversified. But what one needs, and I said it already in passing in a different context here today, namely, you need the temporality of just plain hammering, which is clearly not the present at hand temporality of one moment after another. You've got to have the goal, and it's got to infuse everything you do from the moment you pick up the hammer until you hit the nail, and so forth. And he doesn't seem to talk about that. If he did talk about it, it looks like he would have to either broaden the meaning of historicizing, or, given the way he's using it here, have another word, which he doesn't, which would describe it. I have a feeling he's describing it in Basic Problems, which we're not going to have a chance to read, because when he gets in Basic Problems, see if I can remember why. Yes, he's trying to find a term that would cover all forms of historicizing, I think. He wants continuity for the ready to hand too. He only wants dispersion for the present at hand, which is what you just saying. I mean, there has to be a story. There's something called constancy, and we'll give him that as authentic. But we can't say that being stretched along is only true for authentic Dasein. So he owes us an account of how diffracted people are stretched along. And, yeah.
I don't know what the German translation was. This stretched along, it just seems like a substance. It seems kind of like that has this.
Yeah, well, it shouldn't. I don't know what the German is. Eugene is looking. But whatever it is, we maybe be able to find a better translation. Oh, it's erstreckend, streckens. There's a footnote about it. The specific. Where is he? Yeah, we're on 427, and there's a footnote to this, but you could probably get it on your own there. There's no reason to think it couldn't be better than this. There's a big mistake in the footnotes in this chapter. I better tell you about it, but in a minute. Go ahead. What does it say about erstreckens? Stretched along. Yeah, I agreed, Delan, that it does sound like it's too much like a thing, but I don't know what else to say. Yeah. Right. It's a constancy of the happening or something like that. Because it could be just disparate. I can't think of the right word. Happenings. Then we'd be back at the one that the inauthentic person is in. But there has to be some constancy or some unity or something. Continuity. Maybe that's a good word. Constancy sounds too authentic. That's like you got one calling and you're always on that beam. I guess there has to be not only constancy but a continuity, where continuity already says not just one thing after another, but some of the way they all hang together, and that he doesn't talk about. Oh,
he's really not doing.
But he did say he was going to do birth, but he doesn't. I mean, he's lost sight of it. It came up for 2 pages here, right on the top of 425, and then he seems to have lost sight of it until, and remember what I read, this funny thing that I thought was so strange, where all of a sudden the priority of the past gets mentioned again. Where was that? 441 or something like that. No, let's look. Well, I have it on my notes. I can find it. It's on page. Gotta find it in my notes. 438, and bottom of 438 and top of 439. Has he remembered to get the past back in? Well, guess what? Here may be the way out of this contradiction. This is a historicizing authentic history. Maybe you think that's different than the historicality of Dasein. I mean, this is desperate, but I'm at the top of 439. At least there's hope that what's the context? Is he talking about history? He's talking about destiny, the way the historicizing of being with others. Could it be that the historicizing of being with others has to prioritize the past in a way that you think, where?
Even inauthentic existing, inauthentic.
Yeah, how we do not a study of Dasein's. No, I don't see where you are. Yeah.
Historicality belongs to the being of Dasein, and even inauthentic existing must be historic.
Oh, I see. That is important. So wait. Historicality is what you get when you're historicizing. It can't be that there's 2 different ways of getting historicality. I don't know. I'm just trying to. It's the same as on 427, right? Yeah. So now, turns out, I was completely wrong. At least, since he changed his mind from page to page, I don't know whether I was always wrong. But right now, what I'm saying looks wrong, because it looks like historicizing, as one would have thought, is a characteristic of Dasein, all Dasein. And the fact that he's just dropped the inauthentic historicizing only to bring it up at the very end again, when he's finished, so to speak, is just shows that the question is left open, which is what Eugene said to begin with. He owes us an account of what constitutes the constancy and unity of a Dasein. Now we could bring in Tyler, not living in terms of anticipating its death, but not just dispersed into a series of moments. And he doesn't have it. Yeah. The text is, even within the chapters, they're out of order. Yeah, oh, poor guy. Why did he have to hand this in? And then instead of finishing it, he burned it. And then so we're stuck with the Division 2 as it is. I mean, you may decide, I may decide, after this semester that I never want to read Division 2 again. Okay, anything else before we go back to where we are? Okay, I don't know where we are, but I was going to tell you about a footnote before I forget. The translators sometimes amaze me in the depth of their non-understanding of what's going on. Okay, here it is, at the bottom of 438. I guess I would have gotten there eventually, but maybe too late. Look at this. The bottom of 438, he's got authentic temporality now. This is interesting. But we got to go back to the talk that we got with Eugene here. Let's look at that a minute. The bottom of 438. Oh, no. Pretty surprising. Just when he tells us finally that he's been talking about authentic historicality all along, which at least that seems to be consistent, but now he tells us that authentic historicality, or historicizing, the historicizing of authentic history lies in having been. But at least one thing is clear, isn't it? That he clearly thinks that historicizing is something that all Daseins do. And they can either cover up that they're doing it, then they look dispersed, and in a certain sense they really are, because they are what they do, and their activity is dispersed, but somehow structurally as Dasein, whatever that means, they've got historicizing as part of their essential structure. And then the authentic Daseins manifest in what they do. That historicizing is part of their essential structure. What it is to have it as part of your essential structure while not manifesting it, I haven't a clue what the phenomenon is there. And I don't think anybody will, so let's not. But let's look at this footnote, just because at some point we have to talk about what authentic Dasein does, which is make a reciprocal rejoinder to the history. On second thought, we have plenty of time. Don't look at it yet, because you won't see how wrong the footnote is unless I tell you the whole story about what reciprocal rejoinders are, and I'm not ready to tell you that yet. So, but if I haven't got there by 5 minutes before the end of the hour, yell, and I'll just jump up there and tell you so. So if you believe the footnote, you would be totally misguided. Okay, where are we? I said we shouldn't talk about goals, and I don't know what to do about that, and we shouldn't talk about choice, and I don't know what to do about that. But one thing is sure, that if I'm authentic, I don't do the general standard thing. I do something like I do my own thing. Well, so 435, and where are we? I want to say, it's still got to do with the choose and goal quote, which I already read, but I'll read it again, where it says 384 in the margin. The more authentically Dasein resolves, this means anticipating death, it understands itself unambiguously in terms of its own most distinctive possibility, and that's what Tyler was saying. The more unequivocally does it choose and find the possibility of its existence, and the less does it do so by accident. Only by the anticipation of death is every accidental and provisional possibility driven out. Only being free for death gives Dasein the goal outright and pushes existence into its finitude. Okay, I don't know what more to say about that. Well, it takes it out of comfortableness, shirking, taking things lightly, and all that kind of Dassmannish-like stuff. And I think, yeah, okay. And then I was saying, which I'm just going to read my notes, but I've already said it. So we have some kind of sense of what matters, what's worthy, what we feel good when we're doing it, and what we feel wrong when we're doing it, and that kind of sense is something that's in our thrownness, and guilt and conscience do that job. So if conscience ends up doing something like conscience, except it doesn't tell you any particular oughts, but it tells you, the way I want to read it, it tells you when you're on the beam and when you're not on the beam, and it tells you that by not stating any propositions or rules or anything, but either making you feel good or bad about how it's going with you by way of your mood. Somebody else wants to say something. That's great. Say something. What? I couldn't hear you. What about when an accent is calling? Well, yeah, okay. Good point. I like that. I don't know. I hope you can save us from goal as easily. it chooses and finds, yeah, there's always this idea that Aristotle's notion of choice is what we should be having and not some kind of Kantian notion of choice, where choice means that there were several alternatives and you in fact did one of them. I take it that's what the Greek word that gets translated choice means, whereas we think of choice as making a decision where you entertain the alternatives and take one of them. So you choose chocolate ice cream instead of vanilla ice cream. Whereas you could say that I chose to come in the front door of the classroom instead of the back door, and it could mean this very weak sense of choice, that there was two doors and I went in one of them. And maybe and you're saying that, why not make choice mean that of all the possible options, I didn't entertain them and then decide for one of them, I just got called into one of them. That's good. Let's say that, except that, of course, the same bad way of thinking is in terms of the goal. Only gives Dasein its goal outright. I wonder, now we need the German. Maybe it isn't goal. Goal is, because if we could knock both choice and goal out of the game, that would be nice. Goal's a pretty straightforward word, unfortunately. Yeah. I can't hear you. There's just enough noise out there with my hearing, so you have to talk a lot louder. Anyway, the people in the podcast world will be very happy if you just yell.
So someone in our section was saying that perhaps you might think of Dasein for the sake of which. When we think about what Dasein is doing, maybe we can go.
Well, I see that you're for the sake of which it better not be treated as a goal, and we had a discussion of that in my office, and not this long discussion, because you're for, I have to get it back in mind, you're for the sake of which is sometimes a particular goal, like building a shelter. But then Heidegger says that's very close to your stand on your own being, but that's not your stand on your own being. Having a goal of building, being a shelterer is not ultimately what kind of stand the Dasein takes on its being. And so, if you think of the for the sake of which, the authentic for the sake of which, you may want to call that a goal, as long as you don't. What's wrong with goal? Let me just say that. What's wrong with goal is, how many have had Searle? It's representations of your conditions of satisfaction. It means you know exactly already what you're trying to do and bring about. And it's the sort of thing which you can separate from actually bringing about. So you entertain a description of the goal. My goal is to get straight A's this semester. And that's certainly not what's going on here. Because the for the sake of which isn't propositional like that. You can't spell it out as a goal. It's more, whatever it is, like your calling isn't a goal. You can't sort of put it on your calling card. And and the for the sake of which isn't a goal. And maybe he never calls it a goal. I don't know. What's he call it here? Zeal. Okay, well, that's goal, all right. But the question is, and I doubt if he ever calls the for the sake of which your zeal in that sense. That would just be a nutty thing to do, that all of your behavior is aimed at achieving something specific, which you can state now, and which you can either succeed or fail in achieving. That's certainly not the for the sake of which, and it shouldn't be this either, I think. Okay, yeah.
You're probably talking about choice to imply a kind of de-world.
That's right. Do we stand back and look at the alternatives? Yes, at our own life as if it was a...
From the other things, in that it's not actually that we're outside the world, but something that itself arises.
Well, that's good. You see, that's exactly what I said. Yes, if it means that you were called to do this rather than that, or that you just spontaneously did this rather than that, if that's all that it means, then it's okay. Then you've managed to take away the part that makes it seem too reflective. Yeah, that's right. He should, if he really is making that kind of either Aristotelianizing or formalizing, formal indication. If he's taking one of the most sort of central meanings of choice and dumping it, he ought to tell us. That's what you're saying, right? I guess it sort of calls you out of Das Man, doesn't it? But of course it can't really call you out of the world. And he says that you're always in Das Man, but it calls you out of, well, I mean, one way to put it that I put it in last semester, it calls you out of conformism, but it doesn't call you out of conforming, because if you didn't conform, you couldn't speak and you couldn't you'd just be a nut. But it does call you out of the sort of approved way of doing things. But it leaves you in an acceptable way of doing things, which you don't do them because they're acceptable. Okay, all that is so. No, that's right. It's all in the background. So the important thing is not that, but for me, whether you can state the conditions of satisfaction. I mean, you don't choose for the sake of which, you don't choose what you're going to do, in the sense that you can't state the goal except insofar as you're sort of being drawn to do something or other. And you don't find out until you've done it what you're being drawn to do. Think of the model of somebody who's a sculptor or something, or a potter. They don't have in their mind already, I mean, though sometimes Plato thought they did, they don't have a model that they're trying to achieve. They won't find out until they get done what they were trying to do, and yet they chose to make this pot. That's the funny part of it. But if you ask them, if you say, well, what did you have in mind before you finished the pot? They didn't have a goal in mind, and they didn't choose to bring that goal about. What they had in mind was to make something that when they had made it, they'd know that it was what satisfied them, and they were glad they made it, and they would stop. Instead of success conditions, they've got I don't know what. Acceptability conditions. That's not quite right, but you see what I mean. They have in mind that when they get there, they'll know they're there, and they'll have done what they quotes chose to do, but they didn't choose, and they didn't have a goal. Yes, that's all right. Well, yeah, it's let me see. I had it once, a way to talk it in Searle language. Let's see. There are conditions of satisfaction, and there are two kinds of conditions of satisfaction: success conditions and conditions of improvement. The success conditions are when you have in mind exactly what you're trying to do, and you know when you've done it. Conditions of improvement are my beacon story. You know when you're off the beam, and you know when you're on the beam, and in the end you'll know when you don't have to do it anymore. That's a kind of condition of that's a condition of satisfaction, but it's different than the success condition. This is, you get this in Merleau-Ponty for sure. I think Heidegger ought to have this view, but it's not clear to me that he's got it. Did I see another hand up? No? Okay, back to where I am. How are we doing? We have time, I think. Anyway, we'll get where we get. I have to make some... I don't know if this is helpful, but I want to say that I act without doing the general standard thing. Did I already talk about that? Yes, that's what I just taught. Yeah, right. But now I want to say I have to make some practice and role from the heritage my own. Again, this might be Tyler-like talk, and I think that's right. And what is it to make it your own? Well, it's something that you can only do if you understand that the heritage isn't a bunch of rules that are already settled. They're like the Constitution for your culture or something like that. You see that the whole heritage has two things the heritage doesn't have. It isn't explicit, and it has no ultimate authority, except insofar as I take it up and make it explicit in the living of it. I'm just saying again what I think is in the thrownness story. And I don't have any new quotes, so I shouldn't get stuck there. The tradition is this codified thing, the way Heidegger thinks of it, where you can say what the situation is, and you can say what you ought to do in that situation, and you can choose to do it. That hasn't got the right kind of feeling of the indeterminateness of the thrownness. Okay, now let's see. And I got a bunch of examples. I gave you the beacon example. That you could think another case where somebody spends their life working hard and making all kinds of sacrifices to become something which they can't at first understand what it would be like or why they want to do it. Say, to becoming a ballet dancer, you better start at the age of 5 and ache all over and sacrifice everything else, but you don't really understand, so to speak, the internal goods of being a ballet dancer and why it's rewarding and something to do, and do it your own way too. All of that you only get in the doing as you master it. And so, but again, I've said enough about those. I'm going to try to skip examples. But you're supposed to take the repeatable possibilities and repeat them in such a way as to make them uniquely yours. I feel that that's what Tyler and I may be agreeing about, and I'm feeling that I don't really understand it, but I'm getting closer. I mean, the way the ballet dancer makes these possibilities in our heritage of being a ballet dancer uniquely his or hers is having to develop their own style, having to make all kinds of sacrifices to do it, having a sense of when they're doing it right and when they're not doing it right, all of which is part of that background. And that's all got to do with, I think, with resoluteness, not with anticipation.
You were sufficient want behavior.
That's right. Yes. Okay. Okay.
Something else which allows you to say that my mastery.
I suppose you're right. I have a lot of trouble understanding the own part.
Have those performance-centric movements, but then know resolutely that they're her own, by being with others.
I don't think so. I think that she should know that it's whatever it is for it to be her own. She's got to just do it, know it on her own. I don't. If she takes it from others and sort of calibrates the difference from the others, I doesn't. But and feels even the difference. I mean,
take it over as her own. I think it's.
That's right. I was going to get to that. Definitely, you have to open up the possibilities that you've been thrown into, and that means what for you?
Look at one's thrown path on the basis of what one's already done. Accept one's faith. That it makes sense to be ballerina on the basis of my own.
Isn't that funny? I mean, the trouble is Heidegger gives us so little to go on. I have a different story. Yours has got death and anticipation important in it, and I'm afraid, for me, yours is closer to the text because the anticipation is all over the place and resoluteness and throwness. But I would want to say about the ballerina, she becomes sensitive to the goods of the practice, and that's the heritage, and that by becoming sensitive to the goods of the practice, she's done what you ought to do. She's made her own reciprocal rejoinder to the practice part. So we're not disagreeing, I think. She has to make her own rejoinder, that's your story, to the heritage in the culture, this which makes it possible to be a ballerina at all, and the goods of being a ballerina, that's also got to be in there. So it ought to be anticipatory resolute, and you're doing the anticipatory and I'm doing the resolute. Yeah. What's that? How do you get the goods of the practice? I don't know. That's the heritage. I think I don't know how to get behind that. The culture gives you the understanding of these practices which are something that you can devote yourself to, and I mean, you get it. Maybe that's you shouldn't stop with that, but I don't know what you can do more. And I haven't even got Heidegger talking that way. That's sort of virtue ethics talk and Heidegger talk. Is there something more? There's not much more to say. And so what is the heritage? That's one way to put it. You got a story about the heritage? I see. Well, the Phronimos I see the phenomena makes sense. I mean, there is in the culture an understanding of why it's good to be a doctor or a ballet dancer, and why it's not good to be a drug dealer or something like that. And being sensitive and really appreciating the goods of being a doctor or a nurse or a drug dealer. A nurse is a kind of drug dealer too, I suppose, but we shouldn't get them confused. Anyway, so it ought to be. But let me ask you all. It's important to think about what's supposed to be this heritage, which isn't the tradition, but which is some kind of resource out of which you are supposed to be able to act. You look like you found a place to talk about heritage. Is that what you're looking at? Yeah, let's look at heritage. What page are you on? Everything's on 435. We never seem to get past it. Oh yeah, heritage in the second paragraph. Okay, let's try that. This is just an example of Heidegger's worst. It's just gibberish. If I got that in the paper, I'd give it a C minus. It goes from point to point. Nothing gets explained. It switches from resoluteness to anticipation without explaining what the resoluteness did and why now we got to anticipation. Roughly it's trying to say that on the basis of the heritage in which you're thrown, you have to take over authentically, somehow do it your way, and that's where death and anticipation come in. So at the beginning of the paragraph, you can see that there's a sort of an order in it. So it starts out talking about resoluteness and the heritage and the handing down and so forth, and then it talks about how you have to take over it in your authentic way, and then death comes into it, and choosing and having goals comes into it, and that's it. I mean, but it all is sort of very floating around. Okay, onward. Well, we've got to get beyond 435. So where are we? Well, there's this sense now, we finally got to reciprocal rejoinders, I think. So you've got to take over something that's there in the practices. You can't just come in like a genius. And Heidegger hates the romantic ideas of geniuses who just come in and make something all marvelous and new out of their own inner brilliance. You can't do that from Heidegger's point of view. You have to take over the resources of the heritage and then do something with it. And now there's a little more to say about what you can do and how you see what to do. Yeah, go ahead. You going to say something about that? Go ahead, say something.
I guess the reason why
it would be different from tradition.
Possible. Authentic existence can't be deworlded. It also can't be controlled by Das Mann. No part of Das Mann. And so in that sense, it has to rely on the possibilities.
That's right. There's no other source of anything but in the activities that Das Mann, the norms of the culture, right?
So it seems like heritage is in some way the happy medium between being deworlded and being dominated by.
Okay, I like that. Let me make the next move. How would you get in? What would it be like to get in such a position where you were sort of in the Das Mann world, but not really, but not completely out of it either? And I think Heidegger has a story about this, an interesting story, and that's where the reciprocal rejoinder stuff comes in. In my language, what you need is to be sensitive to anomalies. There isn't a kind of unity in the Das Mann practices. There are some, bumping up against others, like at the time of Martin Luther King, the practices of keeping the Afro-Americans in their place and the practices of Christian love and justice were certainly bumping up against each other, and the way the African Americans were being treated was an anomaly. And somebody could be sensitive to that and take that as their kind of calling to fix that, like Martin Luther King did. And it would be sort of unintelligible because there's no rules for when you should fix it. I mean, it's been around a long time. Why not just leave it around a little longer? Or why didn't we fix it earlier or whatever? So you find these anomalies, and then you can take them up, and that gives you, I think, does that help you now? What's your first name? I forget again. Yeah, Devin. Devin, so look at that. Martin Luther King is in the culture. He's got the resources of the culture, justice and Christian love, and he's got this anomaly, and that keeps him from just doing what everyone does, namely keep on treating the Afro-Americans just like they always have treated them, or roughly. And that keeps him also sort of based in the culture, because what he's doing is intelligible to him and others. He can make sermons. So, and what a reciprocal rejoinder amounts to is you take something out of the back of the culture and you give it a new importance and a new sort of position, and in that way you change what is the issue for your time. That's what happens. That's what you should be, that's what you're called. Authentic people at their best, I think, do that. They take up an anomaly, they act on it, and in acting on it, they transform the practices and they change the issue for their time and they transform the practices. Stephen, wait, yeah. Okay, this. Okay. Who, loud. Think of the podcast people in my hearing.
Cross-dress.
Oh, good. That's a reciprocal rejoinder. That's right. There are all kinds of gender reciprocal rejoinders and anomalies that you can create or respond to. And, and Judy Butler, who certainly knows Heidegger, maybe sees this in Heidegger. I don't know. Had she ever said it was a reciprocal rejoinder? Okay, John.
So authentic doctrine of resolute. I mean, it seems like that not only would they, have an understanding of the norms, but they would be kind of expert. I mean, they would have the norms themselves would show up sharp. He, when he started out his career, he actually a lot like the other artists at the time, and he over time was able to get his constant practice and expertise, kind of get his own voice. And
That's
the fact that I kind of sound a lot like, or emulate or mimic people they already hear, and then some somehow get out of that.
Okay, but that's not quite what he's talking about here, because he wants this higher thing. Now we switched. I mean, that's what you could do in your own life, get your own style. But this is now historicizing in changing what is the issue for your time. And then you have to be sensitive to these anomalies. There's nothing about reciprocal rejoinder. It isn't as if the musician has to take up some problem left in our notion of music and respond to it. I suppose they could, but that's heretical. Well, maybe that could do it. I think Heidegger's thinking more of sort of shared public practices and shared big issues, like what I said, like taking up the environment. There's nobody worrying about when the Sierra Club was worrying about it, and what's his name? I mentioned it before, I forget. Yeah, but Muir was worrying about it in national parks and so forth. Then that was something that you could take up as something which should be paid attention to and isn't being paid attention to, and you could feel that you were being called to pay attention to it, and if you did, that would be authentic historicizing, and it would change the issue for your time, or it could if you were able to carry it out, make it work. Yeah, that's too. I see. You couldn't be called to pay attention to it. Well, depends on how you describe the it. You certainly can't be called to pay attention to the need for national parks, but you can feel that nature is suffering, something like that, right? That's what it would be, and then you could eventually sort of articulate that as, well, what I'm going to do is back national parks. Yeah. Okay.
Period sort of, or the understanding period sort of five.
At its most, as I understand it, it's at its most, not just resolutely, but anticipatory resolutely, and something else even more, historically. This fits with Delan, because it's not as if, it's as if you were describing more something like resoluteness, where the pronomos becomes more and more perfectly attuned to the culture. And Heidegger thinks that is the fullest kind of resoluteness. But if you also have anticipatory in your behavior, that means that you don't just take the current practices and sort of sharpen them up and polish them up and become an expert at them, but you're sensitive to the anomalies in the practices, and you change the culture and the practices. That the pronomos does change the culture and the practices, as I understand it, and I think as Heidegger understands it. He just does the appropriate thing at the appropriate time in the appropriate way, but he doesn't change what counts as the appropriate thing. He just has a sharper sense of it. Yeah. Sensitive to what other people wouldn't notice, right? Oh, I remember.
There really seems to be resolution.
Wait, I'm not listening to you because I'm looking at this for a minute to see if this is listening to you. Go on, but talk loud.
I guess all this stuff, all this stuff.
Well, okay, but you haven't got the reciprocal of the reciprocal rejoinder. You can't anymore deal with nature the way the Homeric Greeks or the medievals or whatever. You could sense that there's something not working with our relation to nature, and you can take up the role of somehow dealing it with nature, but you've got to do it in your own new way. I mean, take Martin Luther King. I mean, he, with his marches and his nonviolence and so forth, he was taking up the role of really most leading the people to the promised land in the last lecture, in the last sermon. But he was different Moses, leading them in a different way to a different promised land. That's part of it.
You know what? I'm thinking about moral issues on but I guess the example that comes to mind with me is like the abolition of slavery in the 19th century in America. What they did there was they called people, which is practicing one on.
Well, that's you could read it. What they're saying, just the other way, make it Heideggerian. Sure, the gospel is full of all kinds of possibilities, and to make a reciprocal rejoinder, you've got to find you've got to be sensitive to some anomaly, and then mine out of this this amorphous myth, which is the Bible, something that gives you a role, like a Moses role or a prophet role or a savior role or whatever role it is that you feel drawn to, and do it, and then it would be a reciprocal rejoinder. Let me read some text. You're all talking, wait a minute, you're talking 2 minutes without anybody knowing what we're talking about. So let me look. I think I want to begin, how about 438? Because we haven't even got to reciprocal rejoinders yet, and I want to be sure we do. Okay, here I guess it gets introduced at the top of 438. I just want to make sure I haven't missed anything. I'll look at the italics on 437 just to make sure we haven't missed anything. If you read, that's just what we've done. That whole paragraph from the beginning to the end of the for its time is so far what he says is acting, that is to act with not only authentic but anticipatory historicality. The anticipatory is going to have to do the role in there of getting rid of any thought that any of this is grounded in some way in God's univocal kind of commands, or in nature, or in reason, or anything. You've got to have gotten rid of all that through the anticipation part, and then you get it all together at the top, very second line. Only if death, guilt, conscience, freedom, that's a kind of choice, and finitude reside equiprimordially in the being of an entity as they do in care, can that entity exist in the mode of fate? That is to say, can it be historical in the very depths of its existence? So we've now found the almost most extreme form of authentic historicality. But it's not the most, and that happens in the next paragraph. One, you don't have to know explicitly what you're resolving on. That's a good thing. And you can't, if you glean what to do explicitly from the way Dasein has been traditionally understood, notice that's not the heritage, that's the tradition. The resoluteness which comes back to itself and hands itself down becomes the repetition of the possibility of existence that has come down to us. Repeating, this is now the rejoinder. Repeating is handing down explicitly. Repeating is handing down explicitly. It doesn't have to do this explicitly, though. I mean, what is he going to call it when it isn't repeating? I don't know. Let me go on. I'm worried about this just a sec. Well, you can, again, like Martin Luther King, okay, the extremist ones take over some possibility and bring it into the current situation. So then you hand it down. The authentic repetition of a possibility of existence that has been, the possibility that Dasein may choose its hero. So Martin Luther King has his hero, it's Moses, is grounded essentially in the anticipatory resoluteness and so forth, loyalty to the footsteps of that which can be repeated. So you're going to do something Moses-like in a situation which is certainly very un-Moses-like, and that's fine. So it doesn't just do the past in order to repeat the past. Now comes the reciprocal rejoinder in italics. The repetition makes a reciprocal rejoinder to the possibility of that existence which has been there. But when such a rejoinder is made to this possibility in a resolution, it is made in a moment of vision. Okay, that's where moment of vision comes in. You see the whole situation, but that means a much bigger situation than the Phronimos sees. It's you see the issue for your time or for your people or whatever, or something big enough to devote your life to. And as such, it is at the same time a disavowal of what's working itself out as the past. That is, you don't just do what the tradition did or says you should do. That's good. I think that's all I need there for the moment. So I say there you give birth to yourself on 442. Let's see what that is at the bottom. The self-resoluteness against the inconstancy of distraction is itself steadiness, which has been stretched along. You see, we're getting, so insofar as this chapter makes sense, it's now being added up. Stretched along, the steadiness with which Dasein as fate incorporates into its existence birth and death, and birth comes back finally, and there between, and holds them as thus incorporated, so that in such constancy Dasein is indeed in a moment of vision for what is world historical in its current situation, which is now a big thing, the current situation. It's sort of the state of the world, or at least the Western world. And of course, you can't have this resoluteness understood as a series of experiences, he's saying on the next page. That goes back to the beginning where he formally indicated these experiences and got rid of them. In resoluteness, I'm now on 443, about a third of the way down. In resoluteness lies the existential constancy, which by its very essence has already anticipated every possible moment of vision that may arise from it. As faith, resoluteness is freedom to give up. Now comes flexibility in here. All the pieces are running around. Remember, you not only need steadfastness, but you don't get hooked on your thing. If it turns out that it's impossible to do, or turns out to be dangerous in some way that matters to you, you may have to back off. So as fate, resoluteness is freedom to give up some definite resolution, and to give it up in accordance with the demands of some possible situation. The steadiness of existence is not interrupted thereby, but confirmed in the moment of vision. That's good. Okay, now let's see where I get from there. 443. Well, there's more about birth, so I want to read that. At the top of 443. At the bottom of 442, at the very bottom, in the faithful repetition of possibilities that have been. Now, this is sort of Dasein now finally at its totalist, because now it's got resoluteness and Fronomus-like stuff, but it's also got resoluteness for the whole situation, because it's got anticipation, which can bring you into relation to the whole situation, and can bring you into relation to your unique relation to the whole situation, and all of that is in there now. And so Dasein brings itself back immediately, that is to say, in a way that is temporally ecstatical to what already has been before. But when its heritage is thus handed down to itself, its birth is caught up into its existence, so we're catching up on birth, and coming back from the possibility of death, possibility not to be outstripped, if only so that this existence may accept the throwiness of its own there in a way which is more free from illusion. That's about as summed up as it gets. And it's pretty abstract, but we filled a lot in, I hope. Resoluteness constitutes the loyalty of existence to its own self. As resoluteness is ready for anxiety, that's got to be in there. That's one of the ways to see that nothing is grounded and settled. It's all up to you, not to just sort of step back and choose, but it's up to you responding to what's calling you. This loyalty is at the same time a possible way of revering the sole authority which a free existing can have in revering the repeatable possibilities of existence. That's pretty important. I mean, that's the heritage. I mean, don't ask me where it comes from, but in our practices, there are these resources which are not explicit, but can be acted on, and you have to, and that's the only authority. That's pretty extreme claim. Just remember, not rationality, not God, not nature. There's no higher authority than the possibilities in the heritage of the practices. Don't ask me to, justify this or explain it even, but I'm telling you what Heidegger thinks. I think that's it. Let me see now where we go. Well, here's a different example. Instead of doing it on the whole world level, I have another reciprocal kind of rejoinder example, what it is to be a father. That's in the heritage. I mean, there is in the culture a whole rich and full of anomalies understanding of what is to be a culture. You have to be the lawgiver for the family and the protector of the family and the money maker of the family and the exemplar of leadership. I don't know, all of that stuff. So, but when you were a father, you have to make a reciprocal rejoinder to all that stuff and take up some role of being a father. But you don't have to do what people have done up to now. You don't have to choose between whether you're going to be a tough lawgiver or a protector or something. You are, and you don't have to do what one does, namely what fathers do on TV or in movies, but you've got to do something to preserve and perpetuate the role of father. I'm going to say, or teacher. I get these two together in my head because they're the only two roles I've got. So you've got to take up and perpetuate and preserve the role of teacher and father. But you don't have to say that to yourself. I certainly never said to myself, now I'm a father. Boy, I have a big responsibility to make sure that the heritage of the role of father gets brought into a new relation to the current situation. And the same thing about teachers. But you do have to do something. My example, which I have to assure you is not based on my own experience, but I mean, I can imagine a father who feels now that he has to no longer be an authority, but be like a brother to his own son. It's a whole. I mean, it's somehow implicit already in some aspect of fathers that they are sort of bonded to and confiance of their son. So let's say this father thinks of himself as kind of a brother to his son. And maybe this is my far-fetched example. So the son is then smoking marijuana. The father can be a tough authority and say, no more, you're grounded, or take him to a therapist, or smoke marijuana with him and discuss what its advantages and disadvantages are, and so forth. I would think that would be or in the 60s anyway, when I was a father, a perfectly good way to deal with your children's relation to drugs. Parenthetical, my children went to a French bilingual school in which they thought all drugs that weren't wine were dangerous stupefacants, and so my kids never had a chance to even understand that there were attractions of something like marijuana. I remember a day in which they came home shocked and said, "We've heard the Beatles smoke marijuana. Tell us they didn't do that, Daddy." And of course I said, well, they didn't inhale. What can I say? But so anyway, it's a constant job to take on these roles as an individual. You don't have to be a world-transforming Dasein to be making reciprocal rejoinders to the heritage. I think that's important. So you can have a fate, and you can have finite freedom, and you can express this whole long thing again of, guilt and conscience and death and anticipation. And how does that on that list get to the historicality one? Because I want to. Well, I guess we just, and historically, we just added it in this chapter. That's what the chapter did. And now I think that might be it. The temporality of authentic historicality as the moment of vision of anticipatory repetition. That's what he's talking about at the top of 44. Okay. Oh, yeah, I knew there was one more thing. Whoever talked about opening up Dasein, it's got to be open to these possibilities, to the future being different, to being called to do things that haven't been done before, and so forth. This is on 438, the top. The repetition makes a reciprocal rejoinder to the possibility of that existence that's been there. That when such a rejoinder is made to this possibility in resolution, it's made in a moment of vision, and as such, well, no, that's not going to do what I want. Where's what? Oh, 437 where? All the above. What? I just can't hear you. Yeah, okay. Yeah, didn't I read that once already? No? No. Well, let's read it. Only an entity which in its being is essentially futural, so that it is free for its death and can let itself be thrown back upon the factical there, shattering itself against death, that is to say, only an entity which is futural, is echo primordially in the process of having been, can by handing down to itself the possibility it has inherited, take over its own thrownness, and be in the moment of vision for its time. Oh yeah, that's an important one, because that's where I get the phrase its time. The other place is the bottom of 36, where he talks about the faithful destiny in and with its generation. I think that's all very important. What? I think, yeah, you don't? Well, let's go back then. You just asked the question to which I gave a sort of an answer on 436, where he talks about, at the bottom of that, there's that funny whole paragraph about shared historicizing. And then at the end, only in communicating and in struggling does the power of destiny become free. Dasein's fateful destiny in and with its generation goes to make up the full, authentic historicizing of Dasein. You see, so there it looks like its time means it's got to be, it either got to be sensitive to the issue for its generation, or even more authentically to make the issue for its generation. I mean, it needn't be that the big issue is global warming, as Gore thinks. Maybe it's nuclear proliferation, and that soon everybody's going to have their own hydrogen bomb, as some other people think. Or maybe it's none of those, and somebody's sensitive to some issue which we aren't sensitive to yet. But finally, the most authentic Dasein seems to be involved in this shared historical destiny of the community of people. What's funny about that paragraph, this is just my own sort of remark, but do you notice how out of keeping with the rest of it is? The rest of it's all about fate. It could be, as Tyler thinks, all about individuals, and my example of father is, it doesn't say much about its generation. In fact, once it mentions its generation, and once it mentions its time. And yet he wants to say that this not only is destiny, middle of 436, destiny something put together out of individual fates, but he wants to make the strong claim, I don't know where he gets it, that Dasein, at the bottom where it says 385, the Dasein's fate, destiny in and with its generation goes to make up the full, authentic historicizing of Dasein. So now it looks like he's going to build that in, the social dimension, in this paragraph. Well, my little joke about this is, I picture Hannah Arendt reading the manuscript and saying, but Martin, you haven't mentioned the fact that there's a society of people, and that there's a community, and there's the whole shared destiny of the community. So, and she writes this in the margin the way you write when you're correcting papers, and Heidegger just puts it in when he's reading this in a hurry. So, yeah, well, that's a good idea. We'll put, because it isn't motivated, nothing comes out of it, but there it is. The other thing that I'm saying, I'm just saying this time is left. First now I have to do the footnote. Then I'll tell you my final sort of Hans Fluge joke about this part of it. But, okay, now look at the bottom of 438. Remember I said only after we did reciprocal rejoinders could I tell you what's crazy about the translation. So look at footnote 1. Where is footnote 1? So we can see what this translation is trying to translate. Anybody see 1? When you do, yeah. What? Okay. I guess I've covered it up with marks. 5 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's covered up. So something about the disavowal of that which is taking place, working itself out. And it's about repetition. Now, the footnote says about making a rejoinder. So it says, where can we begin? Okay, 5 lines from the bottom of the page in the footnote. The idea seems to be that in resolute repetition, one is having, as it were, a conversation with the past. So far, so good, right? In which the past proposes certain possibilities for adoption, but in which one makes a rejoinder to this proposal by reciprocating with the proposed other possibilities as a sort of rebuke to the past, which one now disavows. So that is, it makes it sound like the reciprocal rejoinder is to say, well, it looks like this is important in the past, but you don't want to do what looks like it's important. Let's read the passage again, because as I read it now, I thought maybe he could make sense of that in the footnote. Rather, the repetition makes the reciprocal rejoinder to the possibility. The reciprocal rejoinder made in a moment of vision is not always a disavowal of what today is working itself out from the past, I don't think. And it's certainly not the essential feature of reciprocal rejoinders that they have to disavow what's working itself out in the past. I still think the footnote is very misleading. The main thing of a reciprocal rejoinder is that it affirms and takes up and elaborates something from the past. So the footnote is sort of off, at least, and maybe just dead wrong. Does that seem? Yeah, I'm not. So just don't be confused by it. The reciprocal rejoinder is positive, and it may have an accidental consequence of disavowing something from the past, but that's not its job. Yeah.
But no, they would be right. Disavowal is the right translation, but I think it should just be like responding.
That's right. Yes, disavowal is wrong. That's another way to put it. That they built the disavowal into the German because they misunderstood. I was trying to say that, but I didn't quite. So don't believe that there's a disavowal in it at all. It's a response to, and period. So the footnote, just fix it. Cross out the disavowal in italics in the fourth line and put in a response to. Okay, now you may wonder, and this is my final sort of joke about the construction of this messed up manuscript. It didn't say anything about the stuff from Count York on page 449. And I don't know about you, but I've read this over and over. I can't understand a word of it or what Heidegger thinks it has to do with what he's talking about. If anybody does and wants to write a paper explaining it, let me know. Hans Fluge's explanation is the book was a little short, so he started throwing in sort of undigested quotations from other people without explaining them. Well, that's how it looks. I mean, it looks like, you ask yourself, why all of a sudden does he throw this in here without ever telling you what he finds important in it? Maybe the bottom of 452 is one of the moments I thought I understood something. But historical knowledge is, for the best part, knowledge of hidden sources. With history, what makes a spectacle and catches the eye is not the main thing. The nerves are invisible, such as the essentials in general is invisible. Well, you could say hidden sources is the heritage, but that's as near as I could come to seeing anything in here. Did you have any trouble? Did you guys read it and have trouble understanding why it was in here, or did it just seem no more strange to you than the rest? I mean, anyway, don't feel you have to read it. I think it doesn't help. I think he just put it there because it was lying around. Okay, let's see. Is there anything else we need to talk about? It's time to. You've been brave sitting through 2 hours of this. Go and have some. Take a rest, have something interesting to eat or drink. Is there anything I should say for next time? I don't think so. We're going on. Yeah. Oh, well, wow. You see, there was something important. I knew there was something important. Oh, that's very important. We have to make some. What? Well, you and I have to, yeah, but when are we going to meet to do it? Over the weekend. Okay, yes, we should get them on the website. Right away. How come none of you asked? Did you think that you would have to make up your own topics, or we would forget that there was a paper? Or anyway, is that too late? Does anybody feel that they want to work on their paper this weekend and need the paper topics this weekend? I'm ready to get them on the website this weekend if there's popular demand. Okay, if not, let's meet on Monday. Let's come up and talk to me about it, and we'll have it on the website by Monday evening.